I've changed the text of my presentation because I think that a lot of what has been said from the very beginning of today covers extremely important points that need to be digested, not by repetition, but by linkage with other considerations. I'm not going to provide an account of the last 50 years. Nobody attempted to do that. I'm not going to do it myself because I'm the one who will probably remember the last 50 years best among my colleagues. But what I want to do is to bring your attention to a number of things that you probably already know, but which you may not have linked into the matter of the development of policy and of a charter. The first point that I make is that this generation of linguists, to use Martha's horizontal cuts across our linkages, has a higher responsibility than we had because the chances of success are much better now than they were when we were fighting the particular battles to which we have referred. At a time when the lines were clearly drawn between the language of the outsider and the language of the insider, you had more leeway for the kinds of things you used as your mechanisms for engaging in the contest. But in the present circumstance, there's a higher responsibility, in my view, to be absolutely sure that you are not trapped by your own words and by your own propositions. That is a critical point that I would like to draw to your attention. The second point is that the politics of our region has changed since the time when I was a student of Mervyn Aline to now. It is not just independence of many of the countries that is now part of our normal reality, but also the fact that the politicians have transformed into a different type of animal in our, and I don't use the term animal in any disrespectful sense, a different type of human, if you want to avoid the problem, from the ones that we were dealing with in the 50s and 60s. It's a very different political game in the countries that we are dealing with. And that political game has a different ring of what power is. I am sorry to say, but power in our region appears to evolve more out of your ability to exercise veto and exercise force than it does from the authority given to you by the people whom you are supposed to be serving. And I think that that is an important part of what we need to be conscious of in dealing with the creation of policy and the creation of a charter. I might just digress slightly to say that one of the words that has a lot of ring in it is the word autonomy. But autonomy is viewed as statal autonomy, and people do not like the notion, it appears, of autonomies below the level of the state. And there's a challenge all the time when you move towards autonomous bodies, like an institute of Creole, whatever you want to call it. That then becomes a challenge to power brokers who wish almost immediately on conception to control what happens within it. The third point that I want to make in reference to what has changed is that the numbers have changed. Martha made reference to this morning, and she's quite correct that the numbers of people who are informed about language has increased, the number of linguists, the number of students who have studied linguistics and so on. But I want to add a caution there in that that increase does not necessarily mean that there is a higher quality of perception, a higher quality of scholarship. What it also means is that there are a larger number of people with half knowledge. And I think that we have to recognize that as a danger and as a consideration when we come to the point of working towards implementation of some of the notions that have been articulated in the document that has been created in draft. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that people are not worth their salt, but I am saying that as you increase the numbers, you do not necessarily assure yourself that the qualitative considerations will give you all of that, all that you need in order to deal with the future. The fourth point I want to make is that the outflow from this region of trained cadre is an extremely grave deficiency, or not deficiency, extremely grave challenge to success for initiatives like this. There is no doubt that throughout this region there has been a movement of educated people out of our environment to the detriment of the countries that they leave. These cases in particular reference, without any fear of contradiction, would include Jamaica and Guyana, where the outflow of trained people has been so rapid that the processes of building a critical mass of thinking and actively mobilizable people for initiatives such as this has been undermined by our economic and power circumstances, our political circumstances. I believe that you have to pay attention to that, because when you turn around to look for the followers, they might not be there. My fifth point, I only have 7 points incidentally. My fifth point has to do with value systems. There's absolutely no doubt that the value systems of our region in respect of language have changed remarkably. I'm not now talking about the distribution of use of Creole, English, French, Spanish, what have you, in the region. I'm talking about people's attitudes, where the positive, the gains that we have experienced have also involved certain kinds of losses. And I will say this as clearly as I can. Pathways to success in this region have changed in respect of what demand they make on proficiency in official languages. Ian Robertson referred to the passing of Ellis Clark. And Ellis Clark's generation made its way by their talent in acquiring a variety of English that served the purpose for their social prominence. Now, social prominence does not necessarily reside in the acquisition of communicative skills of that nature. And you will note that I use the term social prominence, not social acceptability. And I think it is important to make the differentiation, because prominence in our current environment can be as high a value of your pathway to admiration, notoriety, a posse following. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have had acceptability. Now, that is important because it means that the educational mechanisms that have to be used to motivate people to learn other languages have to take account of the lower automatic motivation in the society for the acquisition of other languages. The opposite side of that is that the models of Creole themselves have changed. And they have changed because the means by which Creoles have become more widely used are not necessarily means that carried with them a continued observance of the structural integrity and the structural, what's the word? Characteristics, thank you very much, of the Creole languages. I'll give you an example. If you take the case of the degree to which the music industry has propelled Creole into wide presence, wide use in all our media, and you recognize that the performers themselves are not necessarily exponents of Creole. They're not necessarily exponents of Creole, but they purport to be advancing that particular language type. It means that your reference point when you are attempting to create, to deduce, to induce varieties that can fulfill the educational functions that you want them to be applied to, similar to what Lakoff outlined, you are going to be in a new area of hazard that did not face us when we were operating in the 1960s, 70s, up to 80s, which is the point where Dame Paulette pointed to that beginning of the Creole discourse and social development activity. My sixth point has to do with, I think I hit the 6 points in elaborating that last one, so let me just back off that and go to my last 7th point. There's a dialectic that was not present in the early generation bar, and that is that contemporarily the pressure for global communication systems is higher than it was when we were pushing our early heads. So when I say that, what I mean is that this so-called globalization has had the effect of heightening the prominence of languages of international communication, and that in itself exercises a pressure in any environment where you are looking for language development, normalization, and development of languages which have hitherto been underdeveloped in their functions. The opposite side of that is that the said pressures of globalization have also been encouraging what I would call cultural protectionism. That is, every time you have this movement towards globalization, numbers of people say, not me, and they start to lock into themselves and become more concerned about the maintenance of their own culture. And I think if you look at the European Union, you will recognize that one of the things that has happened in the evolution of the European Union is that the more you move towards Brussels Parliament level of totality, if you want, the more the small groups identify themselves as being us and the others are they, are them. And that is an important point that I think we need to also internalize in dealing with our present situation. I make these remarks not because I think that you had not thought about them as points that you will have conceived during your normal reading of your newspapers, your whatever you do, but that you mightn't necessarily have brought them to bear on this particular issue, and I think it's important. Thank you very much.